Great.
Yeah, so today I'm here with Adam Strauss. Thanks for being here, Adam. For those of you who don't know, Adam is a psychedelic comedian. He has a show called The Mushroom Cure, which I believe it's a real life tale of your struggles overcoming OCD, if I'm correct. And
Yes.
yeah, saw you for the first time at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, and yeah, I thought you were a hoot.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's quite a good topic to be talking about these days. There's so much mental illness and so many avenues for people to take that aren't detrimental. You know, there's so many people who are on all of these SSRIs and they're not finding what they need through them. And yeah, if psychedelics could work for some people, I think that the more we open up the conversation, the better, really. So yeah. Do you believe psychedelics could assist our internal warning systems to decipher between truth and falsity? Personally, I feel like that's kind of the main kicker with my experiences, is it's kind of showed me the insanity of my beliefs that I've acquired through patterns in my life. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Do I believe psychedelics can help us basically discern between truth and falsity?
Yeah.
Yes, with a caveat. I do think, so like Terence McKenna talks about psychedelics as one of the great values, and I'm kind of butchering what he says, but the paraphrase is that basically we're trying to kind of triangulate reality, right? Like we don't ultimately, everything comes through our own sense impressions. So we ultimately can't know what's going on, quote unquote, out there. We can't even know if there is an out there, the classic sort of brain in a vat problem in philosophy. And of course, there is no way to know that. But if we're going to proceed on the assumption that there is some sort of out there, then we have a limited number of ways to grapple with it. And he talks about there's waking consciousness, there's dreaming consciousness, and McKenna talks about psychedelics as sort of this third way of perceiving reality, which I like because it is ultimately so different from, it has elements in common for sure, but it is very distinct from the state of consciousness that we're both in right now, presuming you're sober, Casey. It's also quite different from dreaming consciousness, though those have elements of that. So the idea of psychedelics as a vehicle for kind of honing in on truth, I think that's part of it, is that we're able to perceive reality, whatever it is, through a different subjective lens, and that's more data. We're getting different data, sort of. So the idea of like you triangulate your position. I don't know anything about old school navigation systems that they would use, sextants and that sort of thing. But my understanding is that you essentially, once you have 3 data points, you can ascertain your place on a plane, whereas 2 points just define a line, which has infinite possibilities, if that makes sense. So,
interesting.
Yeah. So in that sense, the idea of getting a new data set through psychedelic experience that can help us kind of define, all right, what is going on here? I think there is something to that. Put more simply, I think the more ways we're able to experience reality, that provides more fodder, more data that we can then use to develop our own models of what's actually going on here. But the caveat I want to throw in, and I'm seeing this now with like COVID stuff, is the caveat is that I think one of the beautiful things about psychedelics is they facilitate openness. Openness is one of the major dimensions of personality. And one of the fascinating findings from psychedelic research early on in the sort of psychedelic renaissance stuff going on out of Hopkins, is they found that openness, which is basically openness to new experience, how much are you going to change your views and your orientations and your prejudices? And it's generally been assumed that we kind of solidify, sometime in our early 30s. It's hard to change people after that point in time. But what they found in this research is that people who take psychedelics 50s, 60s, 70s see these massive increases in openness. It totally subverts this idea that, beyond a certain age, you're just kind of you are who you are. And that's a good thing, certainly, because openness implies that you are open to reality, or open to new experience and changing your views. But the danger is, I'm not a total like McKenna fanboy, though I do think he's brilliant in many ways, but I'll quote him again. He talks about in one of his lectures, he says he's very concerned. I don't remember which lecture this is, but he's very concerned about this soft-headedness he's starting to see in some psychonauts. And it's sort of this credulity, this openness to belief, even when there's nothing grounding that belief. Maybe one way to put it is, and so I bring this back to COVID and stuff, because sure, you're seeing a lot of, right wingers. Are you in Canada, Casey?
I'm on the east coast of Canada.
Okay, cool. I just didn't want to speak. I didn't want to use the first person plural us if you're not American, but certainly for us in the States, and as you're seeing, and obviously sort of the whole world is watching what's going on right now because it's so insane in the States. There's this current of scientific denialism that's mostly coming from the political right wing, but I am seeing it on Facebook from people who have a lot of psychedelic experience, and I wonder if part of it is this sort of. I have a joke, and like most of my jokes, it's what I actually believe is true, and the joke is, I think reality is subjective, and if you think I'm wrong, you're right. But I wonder if part of what's going on now is people who have done a lot of psychedelics and who have gotten to a place where they realize that, yeah, reality is ultimately subjective. It's very hard to pin down a concrete reality out there, are now questioning things where there actually is a lot of basis to believe, where there is a lot of science behind it, conspiracy theories and that sort of thing. So this is my long-winded way of saying that I think psychedelics can help us hone in on truth by giving us new experiences that are radically different from our ordinary experiences. But I think there's a danger that seems to infect some psychedelic users where they tend to trust their thoughts a little bit too much. Because that's also part of the psychedelic experience, is things seem really, really real and profound in the moment. And that's beautiful, but you need to come back from that experience and then look at things more critically. And I think there's a danger that we just kind of, we stop to do that with psychedelics. I don't think that's common among people who work with psychedelics a lot, but I'm seeing it. I'm seeing these people who, frankly, I think should know better, but who are questioning basic science. And I have to wonder if it's part of, in some sense, they're having experienced all these different realities makes them feel like, oh, well, you know what? No one really knows anything ultimately. So my own views on COVID are as valid as, the directors of the CDC.
Tom Hatsis puts it in an interesting way. Like, there's some things that are just true and some things that are not true. And a lot of the times, especially with psychedelics, people will say like, oh, well, this is my truth, but what if that actually isn't founded in anything that exists in reality? And it's all fine and dandy to have opinions, but I don't know, it's very strange. It's like this spiritual bypassing thing where people like see God and then they're like, oh, well, I am God. I must be the God. And my opinion is the only opinion that matters. But it's going off the trail a little bit and it doesn't actually make any sense. And it's quite dangerous and destructive at the same time, because some of these conspiracy theories some of them have a little bit of truth to them, but the thing that isn't true is totally outrageous. So that makes people less apt to actually look at the things that are problems. It's hard to explain. Like this whole QAnon thing, it's totally crazy, and human trafficking does exist, but Trump is not going to come in as Christ and save us, my opinion about it. So then people will look at the actual issues less because like, oh, Jesus, those people are just fucking nuts, what are they on?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it kind of gives people an excuse to not engage with what the things that we can engage with, which is an imperfect, messy, chaotic, uncertain world. but there is a comfort in being like, oh, it doesn't even really matter who's president, or it doesn't really ultimately, because there's this grand conspiracy, and that's really what matters. And
Hmm.
yeah,
Totally.
it's dangerous. I think it's very dangerous. And again, I don't think this is common among people who use psychedelics, or more common among people who use psychedelics than the general population. But yeah, I've been surprised by some people who seem to have, I will say, fallen prey to this, what I think is, is bullshit. Um, and I wonder if some of their critical faculties they've kind of, checked those at the door, as it were.
Hmm. It seems as though the layers are peeling off of as to what isn't real really fast these days, and people are having a hard time. What's that word? Like knowing who they are, because all of these things are falling apart. So they're like, this is me, I matter, and my opinion is the truth. But I feel as though the more we just talk about it, and like if we make a mistake, just admit it. Everyone makes mistakes. If we say something stupid, which we're bound to at some point, we can say that we made a mistake. So it's really not. And there's so much canceling going on and destruction amongst people. And yeah, I think that we should get on with the show. There's much more important things to be doing.
Yeah, no, amen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my next question is, do you think that society could benefit from psychedelics, and are they for everybody?
Yes, I do think society can benefit from psychedelics. And I think therefore, this may be a little controversial. I think they're for almost everybody. There's kind of a dogma that's developing where, you need to be in the right state. You need to be in the right set, essentially. Certainly, set and setting are important. I don't want to discount the importance of those. They're critically important. But this idea that you need to be doing psychedelics, because I hear this even from people who, I was going to say, should know better, but that's kind of an arrogant thing, because that presumes that my view is the right view. But I guess, to get to my view without speaking to other people's views, I believe that we co-evolved with these plants and fungi over millions of years. I don't think humans would be here in our current form were it not for our coevolution with mushrooms, with DMT containing plants, with mescaline containing cacti, all of that stuff. So yeah, I don't think it has to be this like really kind of new age spiritual view to say, all right, well, there has to be a reason that humans have been using, by all evidence, and obviously it's circumstantial evidence. We don't have great historical records from 500,000 years ago, but there's a pretty good circumstantial case to be made that that human societies and tribes and groups have been using this stuff since there have been humans, and possibly since before we were Homo sapiens. So there's clearly an adaptive value there. And I also don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that, well, the reason things have sort of gone off the rails at a scale and speed that they probably haven't before is maybe because we've become divorced from psychedelics over the last 1,000 or so years. And when I say gone off the rails in a way they haven't before, I'm not idealizing and saying everything was perfect. You have, obviously, human history is filled with horrific bloodshed and trauma and ignorance and disease, but it does seem like the rate at which we're just getting really illogical doing. I mean, the classic example is environmental destruction. Like, we got to live here, it's not like we can separate ourselves from our environment and be like, oh yeah, we can just extract whatever resources we want and pollute however we want without there being consequences. There are clearly consequences, and we're seeing them
Yeah.
more and more manifestly. So that's sort of just schism from ourselves and from just being so ungrounded in reality. I do feel like it's not crazy to think that, yeah, maybe that has to do something with the fact that we're just not, most people are not making regular use of these plants and fungi, that at root level, for me at least, the core of the psychedelic experience is being connected to my basic reality, which is, oh, I have a body. I exist in time and space. I may have experiences that transcend time and space, but yet I'm not just a brain. speaking out through a mouth with a body as a vehicle. No, I'm a being that exists inextricably entwined with the universe. I'm part of it. It's part of me, and therefore everything I do ultimately comes back to me. So yeah, so I think if everyone used psychedelics, clearly there are some people who psychedelics can cause a lot of harm for. Some of that can be avoided with proper set and setting, but there are some people who, like anything else, whether it's because of predisposition to schizophrenia or bipolar or some sort of traumatic past, who are going to have difficult psychedelic experiences. And many times, difficult psychedelic experiences can ultimately be beneficial, but it'd be naive to say that they always are. I know one or two people who I would say have been probably permanently scarred by psychedelic use. So I don't want to minimize that, but I think we've gotten so off the rails right now that if everyone, say, over the age of 18 started using psychedelics, some people would be worse off, but I think most people in society as a whole would be better off. So to me, it's something that if you're in a relatively stable place in your life without a predisposition to mania and delusional disorders and paranoia, I almost feel like you have a responsibility to use psychedelics, not just to yourself, but to the world at large, because I think this is a piece of the puzzle that we were designed or evolved to have be part of the mix.
Hmm. Yeah, that kind of leads me into another question about SSRIs and psychedelics. Do you know if can someone wean themselves off of them and implement small microdoses at the same time? There haven't been many studies, but I was curious if you know much about that.
Yeah, so I was on SSRIs for 15 years before I began using psychedelics. And ultimately, the reason I got off of them was so I could use psychedelics. Like many people on SSRIs, not everyone, but many people, I found that psychedelics just didn't work for me when I was on SSRIs and I was on high doses. So, obviously I'm not a doctor. Weaning yourself off SSRIs is tricky. It's not that complicated. You just need to, in my experience, I did it very, very slowly. When I tried to do it more rapidly, I had pretty nasty withdrawal effects. So yeah, I think it's something that microdoses are tricky. I've kind of long been a little bit of a raining on the parade of microdoses just because I think we have really good safety. And it's funny, I actually just saw a tweet right before you and I got on this from Matt Johnson over at Hopkins, who's someone I admire a lot, and he pointed out some of the concerns about microdoses, which I've not seen many scientists do. The concern in a nutshell is that it seems like many people assume that because we pretty much know that high doses occasionally of classic psychedelics, LSD, psilocybin-containing mushrooms, ayahuasca, mescaline-containing cacti, that sort of thing, we know that high doses used occasionally are safe. It's easy to assume, well, therefore, low doses used regularly are also going to be safe, but that's not how the human body works. Exposing the body to something chronically works in very different ways, and there's long been some concerns about heart valve dysfunction that are theoretical. This hasn't been studied, but a concern of mine has long been that, okay, if it turns out that, say, microdosing produces chronic heart valve problems, at least in some people, that could threaten the whole psychedelic movement, including the full dose paradigm, which there is a lot of really good safety and efficacy data. So that's not to say people shouldn't microdose, but I think it's just this naive assumption that a lot of people have that, oh yeah, of course it's safe. I took 5 tabs of LSD and I was fine the next day. Therefore, if I'm taking, 10 micrograms of LSD 3 or 4 times a week, of course that's safe. And I hope it is safe, but there's no reason to assume that it is safe. So for me, someone who wants to work with psychedelics for the purpose of healing from mental illness, I would say the first line should be trying to replicate the sort of protocols that you see in these clinical trials out of Hopkins and NYU and UCLA, where people are, in as careful as you can control the set and setting using, fairly moderate to high doses and then a lot of time between doses.
Yeah, that's interesting. It seems as though like people feel that it's a small dose, it would be safer, but in the same sense, if you're looking to overcome something, sometimes what you need is that blast through your old perception, right? And you don't really you get a feel for it with a small dose, but at the same time, you're not really hitting the nail on the head.
Yeah, I think and again, I don't want someone to hear this and be like, "Oh God, I'm giving myself a heart valve problem." Clearly enough people are microdosing now that if it was like people aren't keeling over dead in the middle of the street with microdosing, but we just have so much data on full doses, not just out of the clinical trials, but ironically, for decades, the only money you could get as a researcher to study, say, LSD or mushrooms was money from the DEA. Where basically you were looking for how dangerous these drugs are. And of course, they found that they weren't dangerous. This, in fact, is how MAPS has been able to, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, has been able to fast track a lot of their MDMA research because there's already a huge amount of safety data that ironically came from people looking to prove that MDMA was unsafe and found the opposite. So we know a lot more. This is something that I love telling people. We know infinitely more, maybe not infinitely, but a great deal more about the long-term effects of LSD and MDMA on the brain than we know about the long-term effects of Prozac or Paxil or Lexapro or any of these other SSRIs. To get approval from the FDA, you generally need to show 8 weeks of clinical data. But we've been following LSD for, 60 years now plus. So we pretty much know this stuff is safe. And microdosing is just it's more of a question mark.
Yeah, for sure. It's it's quite something, that's for sure. And the way I see it, like if we have these options, and one man created, and it sometimes works, but there's kind of 2 pages of consequences or after effects. And then we have something else that might be a little intense in the moment, but at the end of the day, our body's actually working a lot better. Then who are we to totally disregard and just say that that's not okay? I really feel, I agree with what you're saying. I think that we have co-evolved with them. And by stigmatizing them and stuff, it's really just putting a spoke in our own wheel. We're not that much different than nature. And we need to.
We are nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the more we can.
I do want to I just want to throw in one caveat though, which having said that, SSRIs, they didn't work for me, but they do work for some people. So, I don't want to disdain Western medicine.
I agree with that.
We just don't know a lot about it. I think, like you were saying, I think it's naive to assume that, just because humans created this thing and there's, it was created in a lab and we know it's safe. We know relative safety, again, with SSRIs, people aren't keeling over dead, but there's few drugs out there, including pharmaceutical drugs, that have a better or more well-established safety profile than, say, LSD.
And that's the thing too, like I truly do believe we're all just doing the best we can with what we know. So I don't really see people are greedy and they do things for money, but I don't think that people are really that smart to have this grand evil scheme. And I feel as though they do work for some people, but the way I see it, it's more of a transitory thing, like if both of your parents die and you're feeling at your wit's end, maybe you should have an SSRI for a while, and maybe that's going to work for you. But would you want to be on it your whole life? Maybe not. Maybe that will kind of throw out your natural brain chemicals out of whack from being able to produce on their own. So I agree with that, and I think that Western medicine does have a place, but like, how can we get to a place where they can both exist and not fight, because sometimes we need to get our leg amputated. And a herb can't really do that. A mushroom can't really do that. So I think they each have their place for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And you raise a good point, which is the way SSRIs were initially, the reason we have 8 weeks of clinical data for FDA approval is because that's how they were supposedly intended to be used initially. As the drug companies did not advance these medications to the FDA and to the public as this is something you're going to be on chronically. The idea was, yeah, you take these for a little bit and you get better and then you stop taking them. But the reality is that's not the way they actually are used. Again, I was on for 15 years and I'm quite confident that there are enduring changes to my brain as a result of being on them. So it's again, they can be beneficial for people, but I think I think there can also be costs for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's my mom has been on them for a long time, and it's almost like numbing, like sure it can numb the pain, but it also numbs happiness and feelings of joy and stuff. And that does work for a while, but when push comes to shove, you want to enjoy your life again. And if there's natural ways to do that, then all the power to you, I think. And I also think that like there's so much medical studies going on, which is really beneficial. But one thing I would like to know is like, how are we going to be able to get these to people who need it? We have, well, in Canada, we have Medicare. I'm not sure about the United States, but do you guys have like prescriptions and stuff?
We do, but we have, in Canada, you have universal health care. Here, it's an absolute chaotic mess of private insurance and then public insurance for people who don't make a certain income. And then some people get it through their jobs. So it makes everything, a lot.
It's kind of every man for himself.
Yeah, it's a terribly inefficient, expensive system that ultimately doesn't produce better outcomes, but it's sort of, it's
what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is. It's not changing immediately, though with Biden elected, hopefully there will be some more incremental moves to more universal coverage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess it's just more or less a statement rather than a question, but as this whole thing progresses, it would be really nice to see ways in which we can make it accessible for people, because like iboga, for example, that really works for people with opioid disorders. But how in the hell is someone who is homeless and addicted to something on the streets going to be able to scrounge up $8,000 to go and heal themselves? You know? So like, it's wonderful. It's great. But like, we need to fill that gap, I think, in between being able to get the medicine to people who need it when they need it. And yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is that $8,000 would be well spent, like the cost of someone having a chronic opiate use disorder to society, lost productivity, use of emergency medical services. It's I'm sure there are studies that have estimated it, but and I don't know what those studies are, but I'm going to guess it's probably, over the course of a lifetime, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe $1 million. So it's a small price to pay, but we don't have a system that's set up for that now. But the good thing is that there's clearly more and more recognition that the war on drugs has been an abject failure, that we need a new approach to the way society engages with people who choose to use drugs, medicines, whatever you want to call them, psychedelics and non-psychedelic ones. So I think there is, you look at the decriminalized movement, a number of ballot initiatives passing in DC, Oregon. I think there is movement that makes me optimistic that it's a tough problem to solve, how to get these services to people who can benefit from them and don't have the resources themselves. By services, I mean, psychedelic assisted therapy. But I am optimistic that we're at least slowly moving in the right direction there.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. And we could even go as far to say, like, what is a drug? Sugar's a drug. Caffeine's a drug. And how many, like, no offense to my grandmother, but dope is dope to her. And that includes crystal meth. Everything is dope. Drugs are dope. We just need to re-see what drugs are, Some are good, some are bad. Some will help us in certain situations when we need it. And they're not all to be shunned. And they're going to be what they are, regardless of what we call them and how we see them. So I think that a lot of good could come from us kind of getting over ourselves and realizing we don't actually have as much control as we think we do, but we can gain control by recognizing that we don't know everything, and we can actually learn a lot more from being in that place of humbleness and being like, oh shit, like I'm here, I know what I know, and I can learn from other people. Just because they're on the street doesn't make them stupid. Like, if we could open ourselves up to that and realize that everyone is a human, and we can learn and teach at the same time. And another thing, kind of going off a bit on this, but another thing about the homeless people and stuff, why wouldn't we want to have more competent and healthy, happy people around? Because then they would benefit to society, you know? Like, yeah, let's allow people to figure out what they're good at and what they enjoy. Because that's what people should be doing. Like, if people enjoy something and they're good at it, well, thank God I don't have to do it. I know nothing about physics, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Feeling.
there's a huge cost to society as a whole and to all of us. Absolutely.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, I'm feeling excited about all the progress that's happening. Feeling a little bit, it's almost like a tightrope, you know, like we're making good progress, but we've got to keep on the tightrope, and we've got to call out things that aren't factual, you know. We've got to try to learn as much as we can and help steer the ship in the right direction, because it's happening whether we want it to or not, and we might as well try to help it go in a semi-positive direction.
Do you mean the psychedelic movement specifically, or yeah?
Yeah, kind of the whole movement with the chaos with COVID and the psychedelic evolution, and just it seems like we're, as much chaos as there is, it seems like we are waking up to our true nature, and it's not pretty, you know? Like, if we've been repressing the truth for so long, and it's like a glass, you know, and we've got all this sediment at the bottom from all this garbage that we've acquired. When we start to pour the clear water in, it's going to get really messy for a while, and that's to be expected. Yeah. So it kind of feels to me like that's what we're in right now, but we just have to keep the faith and keep pouring the water in and see what happens.
Yeah. And I don't know if we're, I don't know where it's leading now. I'd like to think that there is some sort of collective awakening happening, but at other times I feel like this may just be the way it always is for humans. Like, it's an ongoing, continual process, and it waxes and wanes, and there's ebbs and flows. And I think psychedelics, as I said earlier, I think are a key ingredient that we've been missing out on, at least in Western society, for a very, very long time, certainly since the ascendancy of Christianity. And so I guess that's to say that I'm not always super optimistic that we are moving in the right direction, but I'm hopeful.
The Earth might be better off without us. It probably always was to begin with. But yeah, the thing that gets me is like, we have such intelligence, you know, we just use it to burn our tails. We're smart. There's no doubt about that, but we just go about things in the strangest ways to try to we think we know. So we're like, we know. So we implement the plan, and sometimes nature knows, you know, sometimes we don't know everything.
Well, I think humility is one of the great fruits of psychedelic experience. Not for everyone, not all the time, but and I think this also, part of the psychedelic experience for me has often been this sense that there's an order and an intelligence beyond my comprehension. I think this can sometimes play into the conspiracy theory gullibility, where you start to feel like, oh, I know what's going on. Whereas for me, it's often like, well, shit, something's going on, but whatever's going on is so far beyond my limited human ability to understand and comprehend that I know I don't know what's going on, but clearly it feels like there is something going on, that there is some sort of great play at work here, that I have some sort of role in. And I think that's kind of in some sense, maybe the cosmic joke as being human of you can perceive that, yeah, of course, there's intelligence and order everywhere. You can see it in the way a blade of grass grows. You can see it in the way an ant makes an anthill. But yet, whatever is going on we can just get little inklings of it, little clues, little hints. We don't get to see the full picture. So psychedelics in that sense, I think from that can come a real sense of humility, a sense of, well, whatever I think is going on, whatever I think I know, I don't really know. And that from that, I think, can come compassion to other people, because of course everyone is, like you said earlier, everyone is kind of doing the best they can, given their conditioning, given their history, given their limits, given their abilities. And yeah, and also a sense of, I think, mutual responsibility that, okay, well, I'm going to do the best I can, even if it often feels like I'm kind of fumbling around in the dark. This is what my experience is as a human.
That's an interesting way to put it too. Like there is a force that kind of runs the show, and we are part of it, but we came from it, but we're a human right now, and we have the limits of our brain. We're smart, we can think, we can conspire, but it's almost like a dance. We can affect how things work, but we have to trust in that force it's like we work with it, and when we enmesh our identity with that thing that knows everything, then we can become kind of condescending to ourselves and other people and kind of chase our own tail.
Yeah, there's that risk of arrogance, which again, I think can play into the conspiracy theory thing where it's like, oh, I know, I've figured it out. I have this special connection or the special knowledge. And certainly, I think we can get knowledge and connection from psychedelics. But at least for me, the root of all of it for me is this kind of sense of awe, but also a sense of humility. Not that I'm naturally such a humble person, but just that I've been humbled. I've had these experiences where I've perceived, yeah, just the vastness of whatever is at work here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's the thing to understand. Like these are all aspects of ourselves, and it's really easy to blame and be like, "Oh, they're the one," or "they're the one." But we all kind of do these things, and the more we can recognize it and find humor in it, and not take things so damn seriously, including ourselves, the more fun we're gonna have, I think, and the more we can learn and enjoy life. Because, yeah, it's definitely a work in progress, and I don't think anyone really has gotten it all. But yeah, the more we can just kind of realize that we're humans and we're allowed to enjoy life, and we don't have to feel the weight of every human that's ever existed. And sure, we might be fucking up right now, but we can change the script. We can still enjoy our life. And yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyways, I think we're coming a little bit close to time here. Yeah, I've got some things to do today, but yeah, thank you so much for being here. It's a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, you too. Have a nice day.
You too. Take care.